Hello, everyone. Welcome to MIA podcast. I almost got the name wrong, where we cover this topic of will Australian manufacturing ever return to the glory days of the 60s? Here to help us answer this question is Alec from Nukon. So I'll introduce you in 1 second, Alec. But for those who are listening or those who are maybe new, the whole point of the podcast is to explore where manufacturing is now, to bring in great partners who are supporting manufacturing, helping manufacturing grow. And to do that is Alec. So welcome, Alec.
Yeah, thanks, John. I'm glad to be here.
Fantastic. Great to have you on. Now, Nukon, in broad terms, you guys are digital transformation. I'll let you do your spiel. What is Nukon? How did you get started, and how do you help manufacturing?
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, Nukon is as you say, digital transformation. We sort of sit in between your IT operations, if you like, for an organization, and your OT, so control, instrumentation, all the automation work that might be out there. So that's what Nukon does. We're actually part of a larger group called Sage Group, where we can really do digitization on a big scale. We're over 650 people, and we do work across all industries. Manufacturing is a big one for Nukon, given the opportunity, I think, in the space. But we also work in, ourselves. We work in mining. We're an Australian company. It's hard to dodge the mining and the resources as well. And also in water and energy is certainly an emerging space for us also. But most of the work we do is working with our customers to try and get rid of unnecessary tasks, get rid of paperwork if it's a classic manufacturing floor where there's emails flying around and clipboards and things like that, and really just to focus on what's making your product unique. So if it's a quality product, we want to make sure quality is always there. If it's got lots and lots of different changes of packaging, etc., we're trying to improve those changeovers, and ultimately we're trying to extract from the data that's available in manufacturing or sort of decisions that you can make to improve your outcomes in that space.
Yeah, fantastic. And so, us as business owners who are listening, it's great to have like a bit of a feel for your business and a bit of intuitive guesswork. But as my business coach told me, the data never lies. Well, unless you've got a bad system, typically the data never lies.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's always useful as a justification. Often people have the answers, but forming their business case around what they think is the right thing, certainly that's where data is going to help you. If you've got some investment you need from other people or banks, etc., it's always good to show some thinking behind it, for sure.
Someone raised an interesting one the other day. They said facts without data are just opinions.
Yeah, that's true. And data has a great way of even making things that you think are a fact, slightly different, really depending on the context. And that's probably really important with data as well. We hear a lot about AI, machine learning, and people always say, hey, you don't worry about it. Just collect the data. The model will figure it out. And I don't think that's true at all, because then you don't get any context at all. And, it becomes a causation machine. So it's interesting. But
yeah, true. That's the interpretation of the data, isn't it? Now, I love what you guys do. So for us as marketers, we roll out CRM systems. We see from our digital transformation side, we see businesses going from spreadsheets running around with paper calendars sometimes to being able to have a CRM system that supports the running and growth of the business, and definitely the business intelligence layer. What I love is where you guys step in and take that to a whole other level as well. The integration with essentially everything that's happening in the business. And we did chat about this briefly, and that's to help a business become as efficient as they can at that stage in their business.
Yeah, I think that's really important. That if you look around in manufacturing in particular, you'll see the unit costs of manufacturer for a very large organization. They have an enormous advantage. They will spend millions or hundreds of millions of dollars on an enterprise system like SAP, etc. So you'd think their costs would be huge, but they have this inbuilt advantage of being a massive company. And it's really around standardization and really tight integration and only doing what matters. So it seems like they shouldn't be more efficient than a small business, but in fact they typically are on the unit costs by some margin. Obviously, they can buy cheaper and do things like that. And really, that's the idea, is to try and align, because everyone's got access to great systems, and they're not hundreds of millions of dollars these days. You can buy a decent system to count your money, to do your payroll, to do all these sort of things for, not much more than a Netflix subscription almost. So as a small, medium manufacturer, you're in a better place than you ever have been. But connecting those systems and making sure you're focusing on the end product, the thing that actually makes you money, is really important. And that's where we help small to medium manufacturers.
Yeah, that's great. And look, I think from what we've seen in manufacturing as well, there's obviously this push for everyone's touting as the generation 4 of manufacturing, where things are becoming more integrated. And something we were chatting about is that whole supply chain as well. So do you want to just talk about where you have had success in supply chain, and then we can have a talk about this theoretical system which solves everything around the planet?
Yeah, I mean, so supply chain planning is a topic that you can go on for hours. I probably can't. I'm not the expert in supply chain planning in our business, but as an overview, I'm more than happy to. So we do work in Nukon in a manufacturing sense. Supply chain planning in food and beverage is where we really are strong. We have a partner organisation that does general manufacturing scheduling, and we implement their product as well. It's a product called Tillit Scheduler, and it's a digital operations platform as well. But where we do a lot of work is, like I said, food and beverage. So meat and livestock, processing that into retail packages for large supermarkets and large agricultural companies as well. And also yogurt. So, the planning process is quite specific to the process you're doing. It's different from steel than it is from, say, yogurt, or, scheduling the amount of cattle you might need for a particular, season of, summer, for instance. So they all have different lead times. They all have different dependencies, and they all have quite a lot of built-in IP into the process by the planners themselves. So, when Nukon goes in to assist with the planning process, really what we're trying to do is take what the best planner in the organisation has and put that into a repeatable process for everybody. Because time and time again, you'll find the best planners in an organisation have been doing that role for many, many years. They might be in that role for 15 years, and they can plan a lot better than anyone else who's only been doing it 5 years. They've got a built-in computer, their brain, and they do an amazing job. And when they're working, the plan seems to eventuate. When they're not working, it tends to fall apart a little bit. So that's the type of tools we will try and use, whether it's a simulation tool, and we often use a tool called Simio to help us with planning, to visualize it, to see what a small change, and that kind of fits into more of a digital twin space, really. But that's simulating a planning process we'll do, and then implementing that change as well with the customers. So, a lot of what we do is really about change and then managing that change, because the answers are nearly always in people's heads. We might bring experience from a similar organisation, saying, this organisation has tried this, but often there'll be people that have been maybe agitating but haven't had the voice to get what they think would help them out there. So it's a fair bit of consulting work that we would do, and then implementing that planning change as well. So mostly it's about visibility. You bring that into one place in a tool that people are comfortable using, and then help them get that plan out there. And probably the most important thing, a lot of manufacturing systems don't link back what you planned to do and what you actually did. And that's probably one of the most important things that we're really keen to see. In manufacturing, there's a whole range of interesting KPIs that are very high profile. But, your plan attainment is often not one of those. It sits more in a higher level thing that, the manufacturing people maybe don't always get to see. They might focus on other things like uptime, downtime, OEE, etc. Whereas the thing that's actually going to matter is you being able to deliver what you say you want to build when you want to make it. So it's really key to focus at the start of the planning process, and then make sure that the planners know how it actually works at the end without too much slack in there.
Now, what have you? I mean, I think the last 2.5 years, whatever it is, have been fascinating from a global scale. What have you learned over those couple of years? I mean, we've had floods, we've had wars, we've had obviously COVIDs. There's been some pretty massive global disruptions and national disruptions as well. What have you learned from that in the last couple of years?
Well, I guess we were in a fortunate position. Many of our customers are really local, so that disruption was really around manufacturing labor, because it was very difficult to keep things running as far as a labor force is concerned. With our other sort of sister companies like Sage Automation, they use a lot of overseas equipment from a lot of the automation providers around the world. So, immediately there was, okay, we're not going to be able to find PLCs and instrumentation and all sorts of automation devices. So we were seeing projects being pulled back. We still see it today. There's still significant lead time on a lot of hardware. Software is a little bit easier because it's it's not a physical product, so probably hasn't affected what Nukon does significantly. But many of our customers absolutely have. There's an amazing amount of products that are built with a key component that is normally so plentiful, and to the point where customers wouldn't even think of really having a significant stock. And a lot of this might be packaging material, would be probably a case in point. That was probably a real issue for many customers. So they might have been able to build the product, but getting the material to pack it and get it out to the customers was really interesting. And it was a really tough time. One of my planning experts was talking about when everything was off the shelves. Let's use toilet paper as the classic example. We went from famine to flood of toilet paper, and it's just the supply chain reacting. All of a sudden, everyone wants to send toilet paper into supermarkets, etc. So, it's called the bullwhip effect, and it's not I guess we saw it wasn't a super resilient chain, was it? So it took a whole lot of demand in there, and then all of a sudden we were flooded with the wrong thing that we probably didn't need as well, because a lot of the planning algorithms used in ordering processes, a lot of that's not done by a person anymore. It's done by an algorithm that says, hey, sometimes the algorithm's really simple. It says we normally want 10 of these in stock, and we've only got 5, so I'm going to order 20. But I think there was a bit of interaction saying, hey, there's an opportunity here to maybe order 1,000. And I know some customers absolutely did. They ordered a lot of raw material if they had the finances to do it, and it probably put them in a good place, for sure.
Yeah. Interesting. Now, something we also covered was one of our guests that will appear on the podcast as well. They, by the time this goes out, they may have already appeared. Is Lastec trailers. So they manufacture primarily Australian-made trailers, very specialized trailers in Australia, so wide load and very specialized trailers. They're very proud to put their hand on their heart and say majority of the trailers are everything's Australian made. Occasionally they will need components from overseas, and we had this chat around them having probably about at least a 9-month backlog of orders, and being able to fulfill those orders. In order to do that, they obviously need to plan their supply chain well ahead as well. So the offshoot of that was this whole conversation around this magical global supply chain solution. Do you want to have a bit of a chat around that? Your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I think when we were chatting earlier, and it's an interesting one. So, like I said, one of my supply chain colleagues has always liked this idea, and I think anyone in the supply chain area, if you work in logistics, it'd be amazing to have visibility of what everybody has. A global marketplace that's possibly better than AliExpress or eBay. to find what you need. And I think I mentioned that, a number of large organizations have tried to do that, and they've tried to, whether it be a GS1 type concept where you could have an entire chain of custody with, something you made in your factory that is a subcomponent that goes into someone else's assembly, so you can manage from one end to the other. It always sounds like a really good idea. I think that the issue always comes back to, if I'm going to share my production information with with my customers is one thing, but what if my competitor understands how I build that from the production steps and the information I'm providing? I think it falls down a little bit there, where some will share, some won't, and there is enormous IP in a production process, even a simple one. That's what makes that manufacturer and their product special and unique for the offering. So it's a tricky one. The closest we've come is probably the SAP, SSCC, and like I've mentioned, using GS1, it allows some interoperability, but the planning, like having a planning marketplace, you could see that down like a stock exchange almost, and you'll find then it might be just like the stock exchange. There's computers putting in all the orders, and so it'd be interesting to see if you overpay at that point. Or the energy markets may be a good example as well. You bid for things in there, so it may be just an example of be careful what you wish for, because it might not be the best thing for your business, to be honest. So it's like everything else. It's everything that could be awesome has an ability to go a little bit sideways at times. So but yeah, you'd think it would happen the longer it goes on, so that that business to business transaction is much easier than it is at the moment, because we talk a lot about Industry 4, next generation manufacturing, but for many people, it is ordering from the same customer all the time via email or even phone. And where there's availability issues, someone will ring because it's bad news often. Someone will ring you and say, "Oh, I can't get that to you for another 6 months." So there's absolutely opportunity for disruption, and it could absolutely work really well, but there doesn't seem to be a marketplace just like that today.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, because I think I look at the rollout of the internet. That was sort of rolling out when I was just kicking off uni. That's when it really started to sort of get going. It was this amazing beast that essentially Tim Berners-Lee pushed out. That the World Wide Web anyway. And I think what I see happen is that we have this period of bliss, which then eventuates into a period of I won't say hell, but definitely problems. Look at the issue with cybersecurity at the moment. But it's like a bit of a pendulum, sort of swings to a couple of extremes and eventually finds a middle ground. So I dare say, if we do find a solution, it will probably, like you predicted, it'll work blissfully for a year or two, and then big issues will start popping up. So
yeah, well, I think we've probably had the cybersecurity. Hopefully, we would secure it a little bit better these days. But look, internet is a great example, and it's. I remember, like you, at university using the internet, and it was a pretty happy, fun place. And then it's probably a little bit different. It's a bit wild out there, for sure.
It is. I remember back in the days, you'd send an email and people would answer it. You could send it to anywhere on the planet. That's a whole different conversation. So look, let's focus on, I think, manufacturing in general these days. How are you finding from your end manufacturing is going, and what would you see the future of manufacturing in Australia based on what we know now?
Look, manufacturing in Australia, I think from a metrics perspective, has certainly been declining over many years. And I guess our hope in Nukon and people involved in manufacturing, there was a lot of talk during the early days of COVID that there would be onshoring of manufacturing. So, showing the fragility of the supply chain when there is a global disruption event like a pandemic or a war or what have you, showed that Australia wasn't in the best place, and certainly there was a lot of industry leaders talking about, we could onshore this back into Australia. We made ventilators here in Australia, which we'd never made, and obviously ramped up mass production and things like that. So what I'd really love to see, from a Nukon perspective, obviously having customers to work with, but also to grow manufacturing, because it's such an important industry for us to be able to build anything. If we can't build the simplest things, we can't certainly build the complex things. Is to see more of that onshoring. And there's other advanced economies like Australia that have grown their manufacturing. So, you look at US, which still has a significant manufacturing business. They proudly put made in America. They sell everything from, obviously very advanced systems down to even things like bottle openers and, pocket knives and things like that are relatively easy to make, but they still have a market because their product is unique. It's of a good quality, and people are really keen to keep buying that. And that's probably where we need to be in Australia as well.
Yeah, look, it's interesting, that topic. I mean, I think I bring this up every podcast. Donald Trump, whether you like him or not, I think he breathed a lot of confidence back into American manufacturing. And I think from what I've seen, essentially China became pretty nervous, and Australia, as a result, had to rethink of our strategy as well. I mean, that the timing was right, because obviously, we did have COVID, supply chain issues and whatnot. And the other interesting thing that comes into the mix for me is this whole concept of sustainability. If we are producing locally, there's a lower green footprint. If we're producing locally, there's we're adhering to our own quality standards, and that then you're covered for insurance. All those sort of layers. There's a lot of layers to bring more components of manufacturing back to Australia. I had my dad on the podcast a while ago, and back in his day, we used to produce TVs. I don't know whether we'll go there, but definitely there's the aeronautics industry, the space industry. There's a lot, and a lot of there's a lot of emerging industries, but also a lot of what we have stopped doing, which is slowly coming back to Australia as well, which I think is great to see.
Yeah, look, I think there is absolutely opportunity to do that onshoring, and it's potentially a matter of confidence. American manufacturers always probably feel more confident anyway. They probably have more protection for their industry, whereas at a high level, this is just opinion, who knows, but when Australia signs a free trade agreement with another organization, it feels free on one side and maybe not so free on the other. So it probably makes it very tough for people manufacturing products out there.
Yeah, almost seems a bit polite and British.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, the interesting thing that comes up for me is that I think it was on Monday just past. So for those who are listening, we've actually recorded this a couple of days after Melbourne Cup, and we were at a networking event where we had one of the ministries from planning ministries from Saudi Arabia come out, and they were actually talking about their repositioning Saudi from essentially an oil-based economy to diversifying. And their big focus at the moment is manufacturing, we haven't been there yet, but from what we have spoken to people about, they've got very, very high quality, very efficient manufacturing base over there, because they've essentially looked at the world and said, what did they do wrong? How can we do it better? Yet to see whether there'll be a global contender in the manufacturing space, but they're definitely wanting to go that way. Automobile manufacturing, there's a lot that they're diving into, and they're looking at Australia for talent and investment. But just looking at, there's a country that is diversifying, in a relatively short amount of time. It's been less than 10 years.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's probably where it's going to be. It's going to be talent that drives manufacturing success. I've spent a bit of time around Asia in particular, and Philippines was a really good example. There was an enormous draining of their talented manufacturing and automation team for other horizons in the UK, the US, Australia, for opportunity for themselves and their family, but also just the way things were. So they experienced a bit of a drain. Here in Australia, we probably got it before COVID, before they locked us in. It seemed like a number of acquaintances we had and team members in our business as well were talent spotted it effectively by Tesla, as they were trying to get their big gigafactory up and running. And they, through a lot of engineers from around the world, ended up working for Tesla to get that project up and going. And at that time, still there's enormous automotive experience in Australia. It wasn't that long ago that it was all shut down. So, Australian engineers and manufacturing teams were all around the globe helping establish, automotive in India and in China and Thailand, etc. And it's probably something that's never coming back. But it's always going to be about that experience, and that talent is the issue that in Australia we probably have to start with that training as well.
Yes, I totally agree. I'm still looking out for where the government's strategy is around, handing over that talent and that knowledge to younger generations that are coming up. I keep bringing up this story of when I grew up. I used to love steam trains. The most famous one that probably a lot of Australians know is 3801, and they rebuilt that, and I think it launched last year from memory. But they did a lot of works up at Newcastle, where they had a lot of young boilermakers and tradespeople who are up there volunteering, but the knowledge handover was incredible. For them to be able to work on such an amazing piece of machinery, but for the older guys to be able to hand over their knowledge as well. I want to see where that's happening in Australia, because if there's a break in that chain, we essentially have to start from scratch.
Yeah, I think so. And look, I think there's a real focus there. Like I don't know a lot of it. We have a part of our business called Skills Lab that is a registered training organisation that does partner with state governments around Australia to deliver, I guess they call them micro credentials. So rather than having someone that needs to spend a couple of years working and learning all the theory before they can put it into action, it's a little bit like in Victoria, they were called TAFE courses, and they still exist. And I think they're really valuable, where you do a day or two a week in the classroom and then a few days in industry, putting it into practice. So Skills Lab partners to do that with other groups like the Australian Industry Group and a few others to create these credentials for a whole range of skills in industry. And we certainly make use of them as we call them digital apprenticeships. So they're like an apprenticeship. A classic apprenticeship is if you're a plumber, electrician, etc. And obviously, that model's worked very well for many, many years. And so hopefully there's more and more of that coming. And also maybe there's a recognition that not everyone needs to go to university, because we have many people that find all sorts of alternate points of entry into our business, and can catch up with the industry qualification as it's required. Certainly for engineering, there's a registration, so you'll need that sort of activity. But for many people, perhaps getting started in industry early rather than delaying and doing that extra time getting through a degree, might be an opportunity to do that. Like I said, there's so many options, it seems, for young people. I've obviously got kids myself, and see the options available for them. All the really exciting ones are still super competitive, but we certainly know the amount of times you're going to change your career over your career is way different than when it used to be. I started as a mechanical engineer and maybe did one project on that you could kind of call mechanical, and since then changed industries a number of times. So
Yeah, interesting. So yeah, I remember hearing that statistic when I was at high school. That I think back then it was something like the average person's expected to change their career. I think it was something like almost 7 times, which seems a bit extreme. But like definitely when my dad was growing up, you had your job, you stay at the one company, house, kids, picket fence, retire. That's how you live your life. So things are a lot different these days. Look,
Yep.
I wanted to pick up on a point you mentioned a bit earlier around the confidence in American manufacturing. And one of the reasons why us, as you said it, Ian, as marketers got into created the MIA podcast was this whole thing of like, as marketers, I think manufacturing primarily seen as, like, we use this term, unsexy. But I think also there is a lack of, we've got the tall poppy syndrome. And I think there's this, if you match Australian confidence versus American confidence, they're happy to beat their chest and say we're the best. Australia is probably more on the British side, the traditional British side, where we sort of, a bit polite and we sort of ease our way in. And for us as marketers, this is challenging because if we're wanting to get out on the international market and really show our ingenuity and our quality on the international market, that's a big problem. And I think sometimes locally as well, being able to just have that visual layer and communication layer of how good we are. Do you have any thoughts on that? I mean, that's just our view, but what's your thoughts on that?
Oh, look, Australian ingenuity is one of those things that is quite renowned. Across Australia and New Zealand, there's always a thing. Give a farmer, some fencing wire and a couple of tools, he can build you anything. So there's no lack of ideas, and there's certainly no lack of success. There are some great Australian brands that are probably bucking the trend. We've worked peripherally with some great companies like Red Arc out of South Australia. That's a amazing brand for high quality electrical equipment for four-wheel driving, etc., boating. It's an amazing product that is still built in Australia. It is obviously the cost base is different, so the pricing is different from what you can buy overseas, but it's super successful, sees amazing growth because the product is designed perfectly for what people want, and people feel it's reliable. People will pay more for something. Most people, particularly these days, certainly going back a few years, the throwaway society was pretty big. But if I'm ever making a purchase for, say a washing machine, etc., we all know we can buy a cheap washing machine, but do we really want to, ring up hard rubbish and have that, that shame of putting more junk out on the front nature strip? Or would we, pay more for something that is repairable, that is going to last longer? And I think there's a real turn there for us to do that. We can't say, hey, we're going to save the planet just by stopping, drinking straws and plastic bags. We've also generated an enormous amount of electronic waste. And I know lots of people certainly care about that, but even, general manufacturing waste, being able to reuse that and build a higher quality item in the first place is really key. And that's where Australian manufacturers obviously are going to be able to compete with a product that is reliable, that does what it says it's going to do, and is going to give you great service as well. So and I think they all know that. I guess sometimes all the manufacturers, some of them move their manufacturing offshore because they feel that's the only thing they can do. So that's where the government probably needs to support them a little bit better, so that isn't the obvious next step for them. Certainly, there's great companies that don't move their manufacturing offshore, but many of them do, because they'll get it to a certain size where they might be making X amount of units a month and go, okay, the next step is massive. And I get 47,000 emails a day from someone in China saying they can build this product. In fact, they may already be building the product. So they can slap our label on it as well. So, and that's the key thing, probably keeping on top of that and building a product with a bit of extra support from the government to keep the manufacturing onshore, and perhaps more of that's available these days.
Yeah, I'd like to see a bit more of that as well. That's a really important point, because I think it is for the current mindset, it is a natural next step is to look overseas, and yeah, it would be great to see some support, some education around what alternatives there are as well, and especially I hear your point around the high value and sustainability. When I grew up, my parents had we had a Simpson washing machine, and well into after I left home, my parents would still be like, "Oh, we called the mechanic and he came out and he fixed this 30-year-old washing machine." And I think it was only about 3 or 4 years ago that eventually they just went, "Sorry, it's we can't get parts for it anymore." So that was the only reason they had to buy a new one. But that lasted well my lifetime, and I'd love to see that message really getting out there as well, because you're right. I think the global mindset is shifting. There was that very much cheaper is best, which has shifted. I wouldn't say totally, but it's definitely the thing. Probably the younger generation definitely there, and some of the older generation as well. And if Australia is getting the message out there and lining up at the door, that gives us a good chance as well.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, just on that, I was talking with I can't remember which customer. It might have even been internally, because we've got manufacturing internally, but I think it was someone making effectively wiring looms, and they were making them by hand, which a lot of them are made by hand, and then obviously there's machines that simplify this process and make it a lot faster, typically of a really great quality, like a brilliant quality as well. And they were showing their customer through the new equipment, etc. And immediately they saw automation there and decided they should have their product cheaper now, because don't worry about the amount of money we spend on this machine. Quality's gone up, and the ability for this machine to make all sorts of different looms on demand, etc. But they've immediately seen the automation and gone, "Oh, that's cheaper now," because which doesn't quite play that way. There's still machines that need to be maintained. There's still design engineers, etc., that need to design the loom, etc. But sometimes we fall into the trap that if it's a highly automated process, it must be cheaper. But it's not always the case.
Yeah, absolutely. Probably, yeah. That's a really good point, actually. So look, we are heading towards the tail end of this podcast. So I'm going to open up the question, as we do with all our guests. Where do you see will Australian manufacturing ever return to the glory days of the 60s? What's your view on that?
Yeah, of course. I don't think anyone in the manufacturing industry is looking for it to be smaller. You could argue it would be pretty hard for it to be much of a smaller industry. And I think, the opportunities are absolutely there. I think they just need that extra support. We see that time and time again where, here in Victoria, there's a big build. And so they specify Australian content in there. But often the contract is varied right at the last minute to use offshore material for various reasons. Some of them probably true, not all of them just cost-based. But so we probably need to stop some of that leakage happening, where particularly in the steel industry, we'll see, we produce some great quality steel, and we can produce it with a potential advantage, because a lot of the iron ore comes from Australia, of course. But we certainly need some support from the governments and from the trade agreements. Using that specific example, again, not an expert, but the whole point of shipping ore from one place and then shipping steel back, it doesn't seem to make sense ultimately. But in this environment, it does, because someone else has got an advantage where they build a bigger steel mill so that they can build it more cheaply. But where we talk around Australian manufacturing, I think it's going to be where we're building that quality product. So people generally people would rather, well, maybe not myself, I'm probably not a car person, but they'd probably rather get a Ferrari, if you like, if it was offered to you, rather than a run-of-the-mill Toyota or something like that, because it's hand built, because there's a bit of passion and built in the design and the car, etc., rather than something that's a little bit like a washing machine on wheels, where people go, okay, that's not a very desirable car, but it's probably a better choice. But I think for me, it's going to be those products and those, whether that be food products or, widgets and gadgets that are of the higher quality that are, just showing what, Australians can do in manufacturing, because they built some amazing pieces of technology. It's that next step of commercializing it into a global brand and a global product is where we need a bit of support, I would say.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah. So look, before we do a wrap up, how do people get in contact with Nukon?
Yeah, obviously we've got the Nukon website, so nukon.com, nukon.com.au.
For those that are listening, it's Nukon, just in case.
Yes,
spelling right.
Yeah, that's right. Nukon. Like I said, we're part of a really large group, so digitalization in general is what we do. Industrial digitalization. So, through a number of our businesses, we could help across what a manufacturer might do. Whether that's service and support for equipment you have, or like I said, changing the way that you do the business. One of the tragedies I think that we do is we train our young people, with great pieces of technology like iPads and laptops. They spend all this time in school learning technology, and if you go into manufacturing, they're likely to hand you a piece of paper and a clipboard to work with. So trying to get a bit more, a bit more technology in there to change the way that the company's doing business would be brilliant, and that's what we try and do.
Yeah,
sure.
Love it. So we'll so for those that are listening and watching, we'll put the links in the show notes as well as it was Skillshare as well, wasn't it? The
Skills Lab is the
Skills Lab. Sorry, Skills Lab.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we'll definitely have the link to that. That's something we'd love to explore further on the podcast as well, because I'm very keen to look at where's that knowledge transfer happening, so we can support with a strong labour market. But thank you once again, Alec.
I had one thing I wanted to add, actually, John. That
go for it. Yeah.
I guess for listeners in Queensland, we're working with the Queensland Department of Regional Development, Manufacturing and Water to run some workshops around innovation and digitalisation next year. So that's another way. We'd love to see any manufacturers in Queensland coming along, so that we can, use that opportunity to talk about how we can help the government and Nukon on our experience and get it into the team members there for some options for them as well.
Perfect. Is there anything we can link in the show notes for that?
I'll find out something for you. There might be. Yeah, it's just beginning, so I know it's planned for next year, and absolutely, we'll find something for you.
So thank you again, Alec. Absolute pleasure having you on the podcast, just sharing your knowledge. I think in your position, you've got obviously a very broad view of where manufacturing is and where it's heading, which is fantastic. So thank you again.
Thanks, John.
And for all our regular listeners, watchers, thank you again. And we'll see you in our next MIA podcast.